Picture this. You're standing on a beach in Madagascar, watching lemurs leap through ancient baobab trees, when suddenly you realise these creatures hold the key to one of history's most controversial mysteries. In 1864, a British zoologist named Philip Sclater stared at this exact puzzle and proposed something that would ignite imaginations for over a century. He suggested that beneath the waves of the Indian Ocean lay the remnants of a lost continent called Lemuria, a massive landmass that once connected Madagascar to India, explaining why lemurs existed on both sides of the ocean but nowhere in between. But here's where this story takes a turn that will blow your mind. What started as a simple scientific explanation for lemur distribution became the foundation for one of the most elaborate theories about human origins ever conceived. Because by the 1870s, other scientists began asking a terrifying question. What if this lost continent wasn't just home to lemurs? What if it was the birthplace of an advanced human civilization that seeded cultures across the globe before vanishing beneath the waves? Welcome to the mystery that challenges everything we think we know about ancient history. I'm diving deep into the enigma of Lemuria and its potential connection to lost civilizations that may have shaped our world in ways we're only beginning to understand. This isn't just another tale of Atlantis or fictional sunken cities. This is a journey through scientific theories, mystical revelations, and archaeological discoveries that suggest our past might be far stranger and more connected than mainstream history dares to admit. The rabbit hole we're about to explore will take us from 19th century scientific laboratories to hidden underground cities beneath Mount Shasta, from Tamil flood legends in ancient India to the mysterious stone platforms of Easter Island. We'll examine evidence that suggests lost civilizations didn't just exist, they thrived, and their influence can still be traced in cultures separated by thousands of miles and centuries of time. But I need to warn you, once you see the connections I'm about to reveal, you'll never look at ancient history the same way again. The patterns are too precise to be coincidental, the similarities too striking to ignore, and the implications too profound to dismiss. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into a mystery that spans continents, challenges conventional wisdom, and asks the ultimate question: what if everything we've been taught about the rise of human civilization is incomplete? Let me start by taking you back to 1864, when Philip Sclater first proposed his theory. Picture a world where Charles Darwin's ideas about evolution were still revolutionary, where scientists were desperately trying to explain the distribution of species across the globe without understanding plate tectonics. Sclater observed something puzzling. Madagascar was teeming with lemur species, far more than existed in Africa or India combined. Yet these primates were clearly related to species found on the Indian subcontinent. How did they get there? The answer, Sclater proposed, was a now sunken landmass stretching across the southern Indian Ocean in a massive triangular shape. This continent, which he named Lemuria after the lemurs themselves, supposedly touched India's southern tip, extended to southern Africa, and reached as far as Western Australia. It was a bold theory for its time, and it made perfect scientific sense given the knowledge available. Land bridges were a popular explanation for biogeographical puzzles, and several of Sclater's contemporaries had proposed similar ideas. But here's where the story gets interesting. What Sclater intended as a simple explanation for animal distribution was about to be hijacked by one of the most influential biologists of the 19th century. In 1870, Ernst Haeckel, a German scientist who was instrumental in popularizing Darwin's theory of evolution, read Sclater's work and had a revelation that would change everything. If Lemuria could explain the distribution of lemurs, Haeckel reasoned, why couldn't it explain something even more significant? The origins of humanity itself. Haeckel's proposal was audacious. He suggested that Lemuria might have been the ancestral home of the human race, the place where our species first evolved before spreading to other continents. This would explain, he argued, why there seemed to be a missing link in the fossil record between modern humans and our nearest evolutionary ancestors. The evidence wasn't missing, it was simply underwater, buried beneath the Indian Ocean, along with the continent that had nurtured our species' birth. Now pause for a moment and consider the implications of what Haeckel was suggesting. He wasn't just proposing that humans evolved on a lost continent, he was implying that our entire understanding of human origins was fundamentally flawed, that the cradle of civilization wasn't Africa or the Middle East as most scholars assumed, but a sophisticated landmass that had vanished without a trace. This idea would prove to be absolutely intoxicating to certain groups, and it was about to take on a life of its own that neither Sclater nor Haeckel could have anticipated. Enter Helena Blavatsky, a Russian occultist whose influence on modern mystical thought cannot be overstated. In 1888, Blavatsky published The Secret Doctrine, a massive work that claimed to reveal the true history of humanity through psychic revelation rather than archaeological evidence. And at the centre of her cosmology was Lemuria, transformed from a scientific hypothesis into something far more extraordinary, the homeland of an entire race of superhuman beings. According to Blavatsky's elaborate system, human evolution didn't follow Darwin's model of gradual change over time. Instead, it proceeded through 7 distinct root races, each representing a major stage in humanity's spiritual and physical development. These weren't races in the conventional sense, but rather cosmic epochs spanning millions of years, during which humanity took on different forms and possessed different capabilities. The third of these root races, Blavatsky claimed, were the Lemurians. And here's where the descriptions become absolutely mind-bending. These weren't primitive humans struggling to survive in a harsh world. According to Blavatsky, the Lemurians were giants standing 15 feet tall, with 4 arms and extraordinary psychic abilities. They were hermaphroditic beings who reproduced through eggs, and they possessed technology and knowledge that far exceeded anything achieved by modern civilization. But here's the crucial part. Blavatsky didn't present this as fiction or mythology. She claimed to have accessed this information through direct psychic contact with advanced spiritual beings who had preserved the true history of humanity. The Lemurians, she insisted, had developed a sophisticated civilization with 7 major cities and colonies on other continents. They had mastered arts and sciences that we've lost, possessed spiritual powers we can barely imagine, and created a golden age of peace and prosperity that lasted for millions of years. Now you might be thinking this sounds like pure fantasy, and most modern scholars would agree with you. But here's what's fascinating. Blavatsky's ideas didn't exist in a vacuum. They were building on scientific theories that were taken seriously by the academic community of her time. She was taking legitimate scientific speculation about lost continents and human origins, and weaving them into a narrative that addressed some of the deepest questions people had about their place in the universe. And the impact was enormous. Blavatsky's version of Lemuria captured the imagination of people around the world who were hungry for a more meaningful understanding of human history. Her work influenced everyone from scientists and archaeologists to artists and writers, creating a cultural phenomenon that would persist well into the 21st century. But Blavatsky was just the beginning. Her ideas about Lemuria were expanded and elaborated by later theosophical writers who added even more extraordinary details to the story. William Scott Elliot, writing in 1904, relocated Lemuria to the Pacific Ocean and provided vivid descriptions of Lemurian society. According to Scott Elliot, the Lemurians were brown-skinned giants with flat faces and remarkable abilities. They could walk backward and forward with equal ease, had sideways vision like birds, and reproduced through eggs rather than live birth. Scott Elliot's descriptions became increasingly elaborate as he detailed Lemurian technology, social structure, and eventual downfall. He claimed that the Lemurians had developed advanced sciences and possessed knowledge of natural forces that allowed them to accomplish feats we would consider impossible. They built massive cities, created sophisticated art, and maintained a complex civilization for millions of years before their continent was destroyed in a series of catastrophic volcanic eruptions. These weren't just idle fantasies. Scott Elliot claimed to have obtained his information through astral clairvoyance, a psychic technique that supposedly allowed him to view events from the distant past. He presented detailed maps of Lemuria at different periods, described the continent's geography and climate, and even provided timelines for major events in Lemurian history. The story becomes even more intriguing when we consider how these ideas spread beyond the theosophical movement. In the 1920s, a British-American writer named James Churchward published a series of books that relocated the lost continent to the Pacific Ocean and renamed it Mu. Churchward claimed to have discovered ancient tablets in India that revealed the true history of this Pacific civilization, which he said had been home to 64 million people and possessed technology that surpassed our own. According to Churchward, Mu was a massive continent stretching from Hawaii to Easter Island, larger than South America, and dominated by an advanced white race called the Nakals. This civilization, he claimed, had existed 50,000 years ago, and was superior in many respects to our own. The continent had 7 major cities, colonies on other continents, and a sophisticated understanding of natural forces that allowed them to achieve what we would consider miraculous feats. Churchward's description of Mu's destruction was particularly dramatic. He claimed that the continent had been destroyed 12,000 years ago when underground gas chambers collapsed, causing the entire landmass to sink beneath the Pacific in a single catastrophic event. The survivors, he said, had scattered to other continents, carrying fragments of their advanced knowledge and becoming the founders of civilizations in Egypt, Central America, and Asia. Now here's where this story takes a turn that brings us into the modern era. While mainstream science had long since abandoned the idea of lost continents like Lemuria or Mu, the legends persisted in popular culture and took on new forms. One of the most enduring of these is the story of Mount Shasta, a massive volcanic peak in northern California that has become the center of an elaborate mythology about surviving Lemurians. According to this modern legend, when Lemuria was destroyed, some of its inhabitants escaped to Mount Shasta and established an underground city called Telos deep within the mountain. This isn't just a simple refuge, but a sophisticated 5-level metropolis complete with advanced technology, crystal-powered energy systems, and a population of 7-foot-tall beings who occasionally venture onto the surface wearing white robes and sandals. The Telos legend has become incredibly detailed over the years. Believers claim that the city is part of a larger network of underground civilizations called the Agartha Network, with over 100 hidden cities connected by tunnels and governed from a capital called Shambhala. These underground Lemurians are said to possess advanced technology, psychic abilities, and knowledge that could solve many of the world's problems, but they remain hidden because humanity isn't spiritually ready for their revelations. What's particularly fascinating about the Mount Shasta legends is how they've evolved to incorporate modern elements while maintaining connections to the original Lemuria theories. The surviving Lemurians are described as environmentally conscious beings who are deeply concerned about humanity's impact on the planet. They supposedly communicate through crystals, practice advanced healing techniques, and work to raise human consciousness through subtle influence and occasional direct contact with specially chosen individuals. But here's what makes this whole phenomenon truly intriguing. While the mystical aspects of Lemuria have been thoroughly debunked by modern science, there are elements of the original theory that have found unexpected validation. In 2030s, scientists made a remarkable discovery that partially vindicated Philip Sclater's original hypothesis about a lost landmass in the Indian Ocean. Geologists studying the ocean floor south of India found fragments of ancient granite and zircon crystals that were far older than they should have been. The island of Mauritius, for example, is only about 2 million years old, having formed from volcanic activity. But scientists found zircon crystals on the island that were nearly 2 billion years old. The only explanation was that these ancient materials had come from a much older landmass that had once existed in the region before sinking beneath the ocean. They named this lost continent Mauritia, and while it disappeared around 84 million years ago, long before humans existed, its discovery proved that Sclater's basic idea about a submerged land mass in the Indian Ocean was scientifically sound. The irony is incredible. While the mystical Lemuria of Blavatsky and her followers has been relegated to the realm of fantasy, the original scientific Lemuria has found new support from modern geology. This brings us to a crucial question that will guide the rest of our exploration. If real lost continents can disappear beneath the oceans, taking their geological secrets with them, what else might be hidden beneath the waves? And more importantly, if sophisticated human civilizations did exist in the distant past, how would we recognize their traces today? The answer to that question leads us into some of the most controversial territory in archaeology and anthropology. Because while mainstream science has moved on from Lemuria, there's a growing body of evidence suggesting that human civilization might be far older and more sophisticated than we've been taught to believe. Consider this. While geologists were discovering evidence of a real lost continent in the Indian Ocean, archaeologists around the world were uncovering anomalies that didn't fit the conventional timeline of human development. Sites that were too old, too sophisticated, too precisely aligned with astronomical phenomena to match our understanding of what ancient peoples should have been capable of achieving. Take Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a massive temple complex that predates Stonehenge by over 6,000 years and was built by hunter-gatherers who supposedly hadn't even invented agriculture yet. The site features massive stone pillars weighing up to 20 tons, intricately carved with sophisticated artwork and arranged in perfect circles with astronomical alignments that demonstrate advanced knowledge of celestial mechanics. When archaeologists first discovered it, many refused to believe the dating because it shattered every assumption about the capabilities of prehistoric humans. But Göbekli Tepe isn't an isolated anomaly. Across the globe, we're finding evidence of sophisticated knowledge and construction techniques that appear thousands of years before they should, according to conventional timelines. The precision of the pyramids at Giza, the massive stone blocks at Pumapunku in Bolivia that fit together with tolerances measured in millimeters, the impossible acoustic properties of chambers in ancient temples that seem designed to manipulate sound in ways we're only beginning to understand. Each of these discoveries forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about what we've missed, what we've dismissed, and what assumptions we've made about the intellectual capabilities of our ancestors. And when you start connecting these dots, when you begin to see the patterns emerging across continents and millennia, something extraordinary becomes apparent. The fingerprints of a sophisticated understanding of mathematics, astronomy, engineering, and natural forces that appears to have been shared across cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. This is where the Lemuria hypothesis, stripped of its mystical elements, begins to make a different kind of sense. Not as a story about psychic revelations or superhuman beings, but as a potential explanation for how advanced knowledge could have spread across the ancient world before being lost to catastrophe and time. Let me paint you a picture of what this might have looked like. Imagine a world 12,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age, when sea levels were 400 feet lower than they are today, and vast areas of what is now ocean floor were dry land. Coastal plains that could have supported millions of people, river deltas that might have been the sites of sophisticated cities, entire continental shelves that are now completely submerged. During this period, which geologists call the Younger Dryas, the Earth experienced rapid and dramatic climate changes. Ice sheets melted catastrophically, releasing massive amounts of water that flooded coastal regions around the world. If advanced civilizations had developed in these coastal areas, as human settlements tend to do, they would have been completely wiped out, their remains buried under hundreds of feet of water and sediment. But here's the crucial point. If such civilizations existed, they wouldn't have simply vanished without a trace. Survivors would have carried their knowledge inland, refugees would have integrated with other populations, and fragments of their understanding would have been preserved in the traditions, myths, and practices of the cultures that came after. This is exactly what we see when we examine the flood legends that appear in virtually every ancient culture around the world. The story of Noah's Ark isn't unique to Hebrew tradition. Similar tales of global floods, divine warnings, and civilization-preserving survivors appear in Sumerian texts, Hindu scriptures, Native American oral traditions, Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, and the mythologies of cultures from every inhabited continent. These stories share remarkably consistent details despite being separated by thousands of miles and supposedly developing independently. They describe advanced pre-flood civilizations, catastrophic destruction, small groups of survivors who preserve crucial knowledge, and the gradual rebuilding of society using wisdom from the lost world. The consistency is so striking that many researchers now believe these myths preserve genuine historical memories of real events. But the evidence goes beyond flood legends. When you examine the sacred texts, creation myths, and foundation stories of ancient cultures, you find repeated references to mysterious teachers who arrived from across the sea or descended from the sky, bringing gifts of civilization to primitive peoples. The Sumerian Anunnaki, the Egyptian Neteru, the Hindu rishis, the Mayan Kukulkan, the Polynesian navigators who appear in island legends across the Pacific. These figures are described with remarkably similar attributes. They possess advanced knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, and engineering. They teach writing systems, establish laws and social structures, and provide the technological foundations that allow primitive societies to develop into sophisticated civilizations. And they often depart mysteriously, leaving behind promises to return in times of great need. The traditional interpretation of these stories dismisses them as mythology, symbolic representations of natural forces or psychological archetypes. But what if there's something else entirely? What if they're cultural memories of real historical encounters with survivors from lost civilizations who possessed knowledge that seemed almost magical to the people they encountered? This possibility becomes even more intriguing when you examine the actual knowledge systems that these mysterious teachers supposedly provided. Take mathematics, for example. The base 60 number system used by the Sumerians, which forms the foundation of our modern measurements of time and angles, appears fully formed in the earliest texts with no evidence of gradual development. The mathematical constants encoded in the dimensions of the Great Pyramid, the astronomical alignments of temples around the world, the sophisticated understanding of planetary cycles and celestial mechanics that appears in ancient texts from cultures that supposedly had no telescopes or advanced instruments. These knowledge systems don't show the gradual refinement and improvement you'd expect from independent development. Instead, they appear suddenly, often at a level of sophistication that wouldn't be matched again for thousands of years, as if they were inherited from a source that had already perfected these sciences. The architectural evidence is equally compelling. The megalithic construction techniques used at sites like Sacsayhuaman in Peru, where massive stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons are fitted together with such precision that you can't slip a knife blade between them. The acoustic properties of chambers in ancient temples that seem designed to amplify certain frequencies or create specific resonance effects. The precision of astronomical alignments that account for the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle that takes over 25,000 years to complete and requires centuries of continuous observation to detect. These aren't the achievements of primitive peoples stumbling towards civilization through trial and error. They're the products of sophisticated knowledge systems that seem to have been applied with full understanding of complex scientific principles. And here's where the story becomes even more fascinating. Many of these advanced techniques and knowledge systems appear to have been deliberately preserved and transmitted through secret societies, mystery schools, and esoteric traditions that claim to maintain the wisdom of lost civilizations. The Egyptian priesthood, for example, maintained detailed records and practices that they claimed dated back to the time of the Neteru, the divine beings who ruled Egypt before the pharaohs. The Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece promised initiates access to secret knowledge that could transform their understanding of reality. The Hindu Vedic traditions speak of advanced sciences that were gradually revealed to humanity by enlightened beings from previous ages. These traditions consistently claim that human civilization goes through cycles of rise and fall, that knowledge is lost and rediscovered, and that fragments of ancient wisdom are carefully preserved by those who understand its value. They describe a world where advanced civilizations have existed multiple times in the past, reaching heights of achievement that we're only now beginning to approach before being destroyed by natural catastrophes or their own mistakes. This cyclical view of history stands in stark contrast to the linear progression model that dominates modern thinking, but it's supported by an increasing body of evidence from fields ranging from geology to astronomy. We know that the Earth experiences regular catastrophic events: asteroid impacts, volcanic super-eruptions, magnetic pole reversals, and climate changes that can destroy civilizations and reset the development of human society. The Younger Dryas period, which ended around 11,600 years ago, was one such event. Geological evidence suggests it was triggered by multiple comet impacts that caused massive climate disruption, widespread extinctions, and the flooding of coastal regions around the world. If advanced civilizations had developed during the relatively stable climate period that preceded this catastrophe, they would have been almost completely destroyed, leaving only scattered survivors to carry fragments of their knowledge into the post-catastrophe world. This brings us back to the core question that drives the Lemuria hypothesis. Could there have been sophisticated human civilizations in the distant past that achieved levels of knowledge and technology that we're only now rediscovering? And if so, how would their influence have spread across the ancient world? The answer might lie in understanding that the ancient world was far more connected than we've traditionally assumed. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed evidence of extensive trade networks, navigation capabilities, and cultural exchanges that predate recorded history by thousands of years. Ancient DNA studies show that human populations were mixing and migrating across vast distances much earlier than previously thought. Linguistic analysis reveals deep connections between languages separated by thousands of miles and supposedly isolated for millennia. The picture that emerges is of an ancient world where knowledge, people, and ideas moved across continents and oceans through networks that we're only beginning to understand. In such a world, the survivors of a lost civilization wouldn't have remained isolated. They would have integrated with existing populations, shared their knowledge, and influenced the development of new cultures across multiple continents. This is precisely what we see when we examine the archaeological record with fresh eyes, looking for connections rather than differences, seeking patterns rather than dismissing anomalies. The similarities between ancient cultures become too numerous and too specific to explain through independent development. The knowledge systems become too sophisticated to attribute to gradual discovery. The construction techniques become too advanced to dismiss as primitive trial and error. And when you add to this the growing body of evidence for catastrophic events in the human past, the mysterious gaps in the archaeological record, and the consistent testimony of ancient traditions about lost civilizations and cycles of destruction and renewal, a different story begins to emerge, a story where human civilization is far older, far more sophisticated, and far more fragile than we've been taught to believe. This is the true legacy of the Lemuria hypothesis. Not the mystical continent of giants and psychic beings imagined by 19th century occultists, but the recognition that our understanding of human history is incomplete, that advanced civilizations could have existed and been lost, and that the wisdom of these lost worlds might still be recoverable if we're willing to look beyond the conventional narratives and examine the evidence with open minds. The implications of this possibility extend far beyond academic archaeology. If human civilization has risen and fallen multiple times in the past, if advanced knowledge has been lost and rediscovered repeatedly, then we might be living through just one iteration of a much longer and more complex story. The technologies we're developing, the challenges we're facing, the mistakes we're making, might all have been experienced before by civilizations that came before us. And if that's true, then the wisdom traditions, mystery schools, and esoteric knowledge systems that claim to preserve ancient wisdom might be far more valuable than we've assumed. They might be our only remaining connection to civilizations that achieved levels of understanding about consciousness, reality, and the fundamental nature of existence that we're only beginning to approach. This is where the story takes a turn that will fundamentally challenge how you view ancient knowledge systems. Because what if I told you that scattered across the globe, in places that supposedly had no contact with each other, we find identical mathematical principles, identical astronomical knowledge, and identical construction techniques that appear simultaneously in the archaeological record? Let me take you on a journey through these connections, because once you see them, you can't unsee them. Start with the number 72. This isn't just any number, it's the key that unlocks one of the most profound mysteries in ancient knowledge. 72 appears in the sacred architecture, religious texts, and mythological systems of cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. The Egyptians built their temples using 72 as a fundamental unit. The Hindu Vedas describe 72,000 energy channels in the human body. The Jewish Kabbalah speaks of 72 names of God. Ancient Chinese texts reference 72 arts and 72 transformations. But here's what makes this absolutely mind-blowing. 72 is precisely 1/5 of 360, which means it's directly connected to the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that takes 25,920 years to complete. Ancient astronomers would have needed to observe the skies continuously for centuries to detect this subtle movement. Yet cultures around the world somehow encoded this cosmic rhythm into their most sacred traditions. This isn't coincidence. This is evidence of a shared knowledge system that predates recorded history, a scientific understanding of astronomical cycles that was somehow transmitted across continents and preserved in the foundation myths of every major civilization. The question isn't whether these cultures were connected, it's how they maintained such precise knowledge across such vast distances and time periods. The answer might lie in understanding that what we call mythology was actually a sophisticated data storage system. Think about it. If you wanted to preserve complex mathematical and astronomical knowledge through periods of social collapse, natural disasters, and cultural upheaval, how would you do it? You couldn't rely on written records because libraries burn and tablets break. You couldn't trust oral traditions alone because details get lost and distorted over generations. But you could encode the information in stories, myths, and religious practices that people would consider sacred and therefore preserve with absolute fidelity. You could embed mathematical constants in the proportions of temples, hide astronomical data in the timing of festivals, and weave complex scientific principles into creation myths that would be memorized, recited, and passed down through thousands of years. This is exactly what we find when we examine ancient traditions with the tools of modern analysis. The Hindu Puranas, for example, contain incredibly precise calculations of cosmic cycles, planetary periods, and astronomical constants hidden within stories of gods and demons. The Maya calendar system encodes knowledge of solar and lunar cycles, planetary conjunctions, and galactic alignments with an accuracy that wasn't matched by Western astronomy until the 20th century. The dimensions of the Great Pyramid contain mathematical relationships that encode the proportions of the Earth, the speed of light, and fundamental constants of physics. These aren't primitive superstitions or lucky guesses. They're sophisticated information storage systems designed by people who understood that knowledge is fragile and civilization is temporary. They knew their world could end, and they took extraordinary measures to ensure that the most important discoveries of their civilization would survive the collapse. But who were these people? Where did they come from? And how did they develop such advanced understanding of natural laws and cosmic rhythms thousands of years before we supposedly discovered these principles through modern science? The clues are hidden in plain sight, scattered across the archaeological record like pieces of a vast puzzle. Take the megalithic sites that dot the landscape of every continent. These aren't random piles of stone, they're precision instruments designed to track astronomical phenomena with incredible accuracy. Stonehenge in England, Newgrange in Ireland, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, Machu Picchu in Peru, the stone circles of Armenia, the dolmens of Korea, they're all aligned to specific celestial events with mathematical precision that requires sophisticated understanding of engineering and astronomy. The construction techniques used at these sites are equally mysterious. The massive stones at Pumapunku in Bolivia are cut with such precision that they fit together like Lego blocks, their surfaces polished to a mirror finish, and their angles accurate to within fractions of a degree. The granite blocks at the Temple of Jupiter in Lebanon weigh over 800 tons, and were somehow lifted into place using methods we can barely comprehend today. The underwater structures off the coast of Japan feature perfectly geometric terraces and stairways that extend deep beneath the ocean, suggesting they were built when sea levels were much lower. These sites share common features that point to a unified knowledge system. They use massive stone blocks that would challenge modern construction equipment. They demonstrate understanding of advanced mathematics, including pi, phi, and complex geometric relationships. They're aligned with astronomical phenomena, often accounting for precession over thousands of years. They incorporate acoustic properties that create specific resonance effects, and they're built using construction techniques that we still don't fully understand. The conventional explanation for these similarities is that they represent convergent evolution, the idea that similar environmental pressures lead to similar solutions. But this explanation breaks down when you examine the specific details. The mathematical constants aren't approximate, they're exact. The astronomical alignments aren't general, they're precise to the minute of arc. The construction techniques aren't similar, they're identical. This level of precision and consistency across cultures that supposedly had no contact suggests something else entirely: the preservation and transmission of specific technical knowledge from a common source, not through direct contact between these cultures, but through the inheritance of information from an earlier civilization that had already solved these engineering and astronomical problems. The evidence for such a civilization becomes even more compelling when you examine the flood legends and creation myths that appear in every culture around the world. These stories don't just describe random catastrophes, they preserve specific technical information about astronomical cycles, geological processes, and the behavior of natural systems during periods of environmental upheaval. The Mesopotamian Epic of Gilgamesh, for instance, doesn't just tell the story of a great flood, it provides precise measurements for the arc, specific timelines for the duration of the catastrophe, and detailed descriptions of the geological changes that accompanied the disaster. The Hindu Puranas describe multiple cycles of creation and destruction, providing exact calculations for the duration of each cycle and the astronomical configurations that mark their transitions. The Maya Popol Vuh recounts previous world ages that ended in specific types of catastrophes, each associated with particular astronomical alignments and planetary positions. These aren't just stories, they're technical manuals disguised as mythology. They preserve crucial information about the cyclical nature of natural catastrophes, the astronomical markers that predict these events, and the survival strategies that allowed previous civilizations to preserve their knowledge through periods of destruction and renewal. This brings us to one of the most intriguing aspects of the Lemuria hypothesis: the possibility that ancient civilizations developed not just advanced technology, but advanced understanding of natural cycles and planetary rhythms that allowed them to predict and prepare for catastrophic events. They knew their world was temporary. They understood that civilizations rise and fall according to cosmic rhythms, and they developed sophisticated strategies for preserving knowledge across these cycles. The evidence for this understanding appears in the astronomical alignments of ancient sites, which often mark not just current celestial events, but future configurations that won't occur for thousands of years. The Pyramid of Giza, for example, is aligned not just with the stars as they appeared when it was built, but with their positions during specific future epochs, as if its builders were creating a time capsule that would only reveal its full meaning to future civilizations that achieved comparable astronomical knowledge. The same pattern appears at sites around the world, structures that encode multiple layers of information, revealing different meanings as human understanding advances. They're designed to function as both practical tools for contemporary use and educational devices for future discoveries, ensuring that crucial knowledge would be preserved even if the civilization that created them disappeared entirely. This multi-layered approach to information storage suggests something profound about the mindset of these ancient builders. They weren't just solving immediate practical problems, they were thinking in terms of civilizational continuity across vast spans of time. They understood that knowledge accumulates slowly and is lost quickly, that technological advancement is fragile and can be wiped out by natural disasters or social collapse. So they built redundancy into every system they created. They encoded the same information in multiple formats: architectural proportions, astronomical alignments, mathematical relationships, mythological narratives, and ritual practices. They created networks of sites that reinforced and validated each other's information. They established traditions that would preserve crucial knowledge even if the original context was forgotten. This systematic approach to knowledge preservation points to a level of sophisticated thinking about information theory, systems design, and long-term planning that we're only beginning to appreciate. These weren't primitive peoples stumbling toward understanding through trial and error. They were advanced civilizations with deep insight into the nature of knowledge, the patterns of history, and the challenges of maintaining continuity across cosmic timescales. The implications of this realization extend far beyond archaeology or ancient history. If human civilization has indeed gone through multiple cycles of rise and fall, if advanced knowledge has been lost and rediscovered repeatedly, then we might be living through just one iteration of a much longer story. The technologies we're developing, the discoveries we're making, the challenges we're facing, might all have been experienced before by civilizations that came before us. This possibility is both humbling and empowering. Humbling because it suggests that human achievement is more fragile and temporary than we like to believe. Empowering because it implies that the wisdom traditions, mystery schools, and esoteric knowledge systems that claim to preserve ancient understanding might contain genuine insights that could help us navigate our current challenges. The question is whether we're wise enough to recognize these insights and humble enough to learn from them. The builders of the ancient sites seem to have understood something that we're still struggling to grasp: that individual civilizations are temporary, but knowledge itself can be eternal if it's properly preserved and transmitted. They created a legacy that transcends the rise and fall of particular cultures, encoding universal principles in forms that would survive the collapse of their own world and speak to future civilizations that achieved sufficient sophistication to decode their messages. They built monuments to human understanding itself, ensuring that the most important discoveries of their age would not be lost when their cities fell and their libraries burned. We stand today at a similar crossroads. Our own civilization has achieved remarkable technological capabilities, but we're also facing challenges that could threaten our long-term survival: climate change, resource depletion, social instability, and the possibility of catastrophic events that could reset human development. The question is whether we have the wisdom to learn from the examples of those who came before us, to build our own systems of knowledge preservation that could survive whatever challenges the future might bring. The legacy of Lemuria, stripped of its mystical elements and understood as a symbol of lost civilizational wisdom, offers us a model for thinking about these challenges. It reminds us that human achievement is both magnificent and fragile, that knowledge can be lost as well as gained, and that the responsibility for preserving understanding across generations is one of the most important tasks any civilization can undertake. But it also suggests that we're not alone in facing these challenges, that other civilizations have walked this path before us and left us clues about how to navigate the difficulties ahead. The astronomical alignments, mathematical constants, and construction techniques encoded in ancient sites around the world aren't just historical curiosities, they're messages from our predecessors, attempts to communicate across the vast spans of time that separate one human civilization from another. The question we must ask ourselves is this: are we ready to receive these messages? Because the evidence suggests that the information is already there, waiting for us to develop the sophistication necessary to decode it. And the more we advance in our understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and physics, the more we realize that the ancients encoded truths we're only now beginning to comprehend. Consider the acoustic properties discovered at ancient sites around the world. At the Temple of Kukulkan in Mexico, clapping your hands at the base of the pyramid produces an echo that sounds exactly like the call of the Quetzal bird, sacred to the Maya. At the Whispering Gallery in the Temple of Heaven in China, words spoken at one end of a circular wall can be heard clearly at the opposite end, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of sound wave physics. The chambers beneath the Great Pyramid produce resonance frequencies that match the Schumann resonance of the Earth itself. These aren't accidents or coincidences. They're evidence of deliberate engineering designed to create specific acoustic effects using principles we're still studying today. The builders understood that sound waves could be manipulated, that certain frequencies could induce altered states of consciousness, and that acoustic resonance could be used to enhance the psychological impact of sacred spaces. This knowledge appears simultaneously at sites across the globe, in cultures that supposedly developed independently. The megalithic chambers of Ireland produce identical acoustic effects to those found in Peruvian temples. The stone circles of Scotland demonstrate the same understanding of resonance frequencies as the pyramids of Egypt. The probability of these similarities arising through independent discovery approaches zero. What emerges is a picture of a global knowledge network that operated according to principles we're only beginning to understand. These weren't isolated civilizations struggling in darkness. They were interconnected cultures sharing sophisticated understanding of natural laws and cosmic principles. The evidence suggests they had developed not just advanced technology, but advanced consciousness, an awareness of subtle energies and information fields that we're only now rediscovering through quantum physics and consciousness research. The mystery deepens when we examine the precision with which these ancient sites track astronomical phenomena across vast periods of time. The Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a Greek shipwreck, is a bronze computer capable of predicting solar and lunar eclipses, planetary positions, and Olympic Games schedules for decades in advance. Its sophistication rivals mechanical clocks that wouldn't be invented for another 1,000 years. But here's what's truly remarkable. The astronomical data it contains appears to be based on observations that predate its construction by centuries, suggesting it was built using knowledge inherited from much earlier sources. This pattern repeats across the ancient world. The Dresden Codex of the Maya contains astronomical calculations accurate to within minutes of arc, tracking Venus cycles with precision that wasn't matched by European astronomy until the invention of telescopes. The Nabta Playa stone circle in Egypt, dating to 6000 BCE, demonstrates understanding of stellar precession that requires continuous observation spanning thousands of years. The Goseck Circle in Germany, built 7,000 years ago, marks solar and lunar extremes with mathematical precision that implies sophisticated surveying techniques. These sites aren't just observatories, they're time machines. They encode knowledge that spans multiple astronomical cycles, preserving information that would be impossible for any single culture to accumulate through direct observation. They suggest the existence of a multi-generational scientific tradition that maintained precise records across periods longer than recorded history, a civilization that thought in terms of cosmic time rather than human lifespans. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this ancient knowledge network is how it dealt with catastrophic disruption, because the evidence suggests these civilizations didn't just predict natural disasters, they prepared for them. They created multiple backup systems for preserving crucial information, distributed their knowledge across numerous sites and cultures, and developed traditions that could maintain continuity even through periods of complete social collapse. The flood myths that appear in every culture aren't just stories about divine punishment. They're technical manuals for civilizational survival. They describe specific warning signs that precede catastrophic events, detailed procedures for preserving essential knowledge and resources, and systematic approaches to rebuilding society using inherited wisdom. The consistency of these narratives across cultures suggests they're based on actual experience, with catastrophic events and successful recovery strategies. The Hindu concept of yugas, or world ages, provides perhaps the most sophisticated model for understanding these cycles. According to Vedic tradition, human civilization goes through repeating periods of advancement and decline, each lasting thousands of years and ending in specific types of catastrophes. The texts provide precise calculations for the duration of each cycle, the astronomical markers that signal transitions between ages, and the characteristics of civilizations that develop during different periods. What's remarkable about these calculations is their accuracy when compared to modern geological and astronomical data. The Vedic timescales correspond closely to known patterns of climate change, magnetic pole reversals, and astronomical cycles that affect Earth's environment. The descriptions of different world ages match archaeological evidence for periods of rapid human advancement, followed by cultural collapse and rebuilding. This suggests that the Vedic tradition preserves genuine historical memory of multiple civilizational cycles, each building on the knowledge of the previous age while adapting to changing environmental conditions. The texts describe how knowledge is transmitted between cycles through various means: oral traditions maintained by specially trained groups, written records hidden in secure locations, and symbolic information encoded in architectural monuments and ritual practices. The implications of this cyclical model extend far beyond ancient history. If human civilization has indeed gone through multiple iterations, then the challenges we face today — climate change, resource depletion, technological disruption, social instability — may be variations on themes that have been experienced and solved before. The wisdom traditions that claim to preserve ancient knowledge might contain practical guidance for navigating these challenges, tested strategies that have proven effective across multiple civilizational cycles. This brings us to one of the most controversial aspects of the Lemuria hypothesis: the possibility that some of this ancient knowledge has been deliberately preserved and transmitted through secret societies and esoteric traditions that operate outside mainstream historical narratives. The evidence for such preservation networks is fragmentary but intriguing, scattered across centuries of historical records and hidden in the symbolism of organizations that claim continuity with ancient sources. The Egyptian mystery schools, for example, maintain detailed archives and initiation practices that they claim dated back to the time before the pharaohs, when divine beings ruled Egypt directly. These schools preserved mathematical and astronomical knowledge that wouldn't be rediscovered by mainstream civilization for thousands of years. They developed sophisticated techniques for altered states of consciousness that allowed initiates to access information through non-ordinary means, and they created networks that spread this knowledge throughout the ancient Mediterranean world, influencing the development of Greek philosophy, Roman engineering, and early Christian mysticism. Similar patterns appear in other traditions. The Vedic schools of ancient India maintained unbroken lineages of knowledge transmission spanning thousands of years, preserving detailed understanding of consciousness, cosmology, and natural law through oral traditions that were considered too sacred to write down. The Druidic colleges of Celtic Europe operated sophisticated centres of learning that attracted students from across the known world, teaching advanced mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy centuries before the establishment of European universities. These weren't primitive religious cults or superstitious magical societies. They were sophisticated educational institutions that preserved and transmitted advanced knowledge using methods specifically designed to ensure continuity across periods of social upheaval. They operated according to principles we're only now beginning to understand: the importance of direct experience in learning, the value of symbolic thinking for encoding complex information, and the necessity of maintaining multiple parallel systems for knowledge preservation. The question is whether any of these preservation networks survived into the modern era. The historical record suggests that many of them were deliberately suppressed or driven underground by religious and political authorities who saw them as threats to established power structures. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria, the persecution of pagan philosophers by early Christians, the suppression of indigenous knowledge traditions by colonial powers, all represent systematic attempts to eliminate alternative sources of knowledge and authority. But suppression isn't the same as elimination. Knowledge has a way of surviving even the most determined efforts to destroy it, adapting to new conditions and finding new forms of expression. The mathematical principles encoded in Gothic cathedrals suggest that medieval builders had access to geometric knowledge that supposedly vanished with the fall of Rome. The astronomical alignments incorporated into Renaissance architecture indicate that certain groups maintained understanding of cosmic cycles through the Dark Ages. The symbolic systems used by various fraternal organizations contain references to ancient knowledge traditions that claim unbroken continuity with prehistoric sources. The challenge is separating genuine preservation of ancient knowledge from romantic fantasy and deliberate deception. Many groups that claim ancient lineages are clearly modern inventions, created to add mystique to otherwise ordinary organizations. But some demonstrate access to information that's difficult to explain through conventional historical channels, knowledge that seems to derive from sources much older than their official founding dates. The key is to focus on verifiable information rather than unsubstantiated claims. When a tradition demonstrates practical knowledge that works, when it preserves mathematical or astronomical information that can be tested against modern measurements, when it maintains techniques that produce measurable results, then it deserves serious consideration regardless of the fantastic stories that might surround it. This empirical approach reveals something remarkable. Many esoteric traditions that claim to preserve ancient knowledge actually do contain information that's both accurate and sophisticated, even when their historical claims are questionable. The geometric principles used in sacred architecture, the astronomical calculations embedded in ritual calendars, the consciousness techniques taught in mystery schools, these elements often demonstrate understanding that exceeds what mainstream history attributes to their supposed time periods. This suggests a complex relationship between genuine knowledge preservation and mythological elaboration. The core information might be authentic, derived from ancient sources through carefully maintained transmission lineages, while the stories that explain its origins become increasingly fantastic over time. As the original context is forgotten, and new generations add their own interpretations, the result is a kind of signal-to-noise problem, valuable information embedded in layers of speculation, misunderstanding, and deliberate obfuscation. The challenge for modern researchers is developing methods to extract the signal while filtering out the noise to identify genuine ancient knowledge while remaining skeptical of unsupported claims about its origins. This process becomes even more complex when we consider that some of the most advanced ancient knowledge might deal with subjects that mainstream science is only beginning to investigate: consciousness research, subtle energy phenomena, non-local information transfer, and the role of intention in physical systems. If ancient civilizations developed sophisticated understanding of these subjects, their knowledge might be preserved in traditions that seem unscientific to modern observers while actually representing advanced applications of principles we haven't yet discovered. The field of consciousness research provides an interesting example of this phenomenon. Modern neuroscience is beginning to validate techniques for altered states of consciousness that have been maintained by traditional cultures for thousands of years. Meditation practices that ancient texts claim can access non-ordinary sources of information are now shown to produce measurable changes in brain function that enhance pattern recognition, intuitive insight, and access to normally unconscious processing. Breathing techniques described in ancient yoga texts are found to activate specific neural networks associated with expanded awareness and enhanced cognitive function. These discoveries suggest that ancient traditions preserved practical knowledge about consciousness and its capabilities that was systematically ignored or suppressed by the mechanistic worldview that dominated science for the past several centuries. As our understanding of consciousness expands, we're finding that many supposedly primitive or superstitious practices actually represent sophisticated applications of principles that we're only now beginning to understand scientifically. This has profound implications for how we evaluate claims about lost civilizations and preserved ancient knowledge. If consciousness itself can access information through non-ordinary means, if human awareness has capabilities that extend beyond the limitations of sensory perception and rational analysis, then some of the more extraordinary claims about ancient knowledge might deserve more serious consideration than they've traditionally received. The challenge is developing rigorous methods for investigating these possibilities without abandoning scientific skepticism or falling into wishful thinking. This requires a delicate balance, remaining open to evidence that challenges conventional assumptions while maintaining strict standards for verification and proof. But here's what makes this investigation so compelling. The more we advance in our understanding of physics, consciousness, and information theory, the more we realize that reality itself might be far stranger and more interconnected than our current scientific paradigms suggest. Quantum entanglement demonstrates that information can be transmitted instantaneously across vast distances. Studies of consciousness show that human awareness can access information through channels that classical physics can't explain. Research into morphic resonance suggests that information might be transmitted across time through mechanisms we don't yet understand. If reality operates according to principles that allow for non-local information transfer, if consciousness has access to information fields that extend beyond individual brains, if knowledge can be transmitted across time through means we haven't yet discovered, then the preservation of ancient wisdom becomes not just possible but inevitable. The information doesn't disappear when civilizations fall, it continues to exist in various forms, accessible to those who develop the appropriate techniques for accessing it. This perspective transforms our understanding of what it means to recover lost knowledge. Instead of relying solely on archaeological artifacts and historical documents, we might also be able to access ancient information through direct consciousness techniques, by developing the same methods that original discoverers used to access universal principles and natural laws. This possibility is both exciting and challenging. Exciting because it suggests that the greatest achievements of past civilizations might still be recoverable, that we don't have to reinvent everything from scratch, but can build on the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of human development. Challenging because it requires us to expand our definition of what constitutes valid knowledge and reliable methods of investigation. The implications extend far beyond academic research into ancient history. If human civilization has indeed gone through multiple cycles of development, if advanced knowledge has been preserved across these cycles through various means, then we might be on the verge of a renaissance that combines the best achievements of past ages with the unique capabilities of our current technological civilization. Imagine having access to the consciousness techniques of ancient yogis combined with modern neuroscience, the astronomical knowledge of megalithic builders enhanced by space-based telescopes, the mathematical insights of forgotten geometers applied to quantum physics and information theory. The potential for breakthrough discoveries that could transform our understanding of reality and our capabilities as a species is extraordinary, but realizing this potential requires more than just recovering lost information. It requires developing the wisdom to use advanced knowledge responsibly, the humility to learn from the mistakes of previous civilizations, and the foresight to build systems that can preserve crucial understanding across future cycles of change and disruption. This is perhaps the most important lesson we can learn from the Lemuria hypothesis, that knowledge and wisdom are not the same thing, that technological capability without ethical understanding leads to destruction, and that the greatest challenge facing any advanced civilization is learning to use its power in service of long-term survival and flourishing, rather than short-term advantage and exploitation. The ancient builders who encoded mathematical constants in their monuments, who aligned their temples with cosmic cycles, who preserved their knowledge in forms designed to survive the collapse of their own civilization, understood something crucial about the nature of wisdom. They knew that true advancement isn't measured by technological capability alone, but by the ability to maintain harmony with natural systems and cosmic principles across vast spans of time. They built not just for their own generation, but for all future generations that might achieve sufficient understanding to decode their messages. They created a legacy that transcends the rise and fall of particular cultures, encoding universal principles in forms that would speak to any civilization that developed comparable sophistication in mathematics, astronomy, and consciousness. We stand today at a similar crossroads, possessing capabilities that could either elevate human civilization to unprecedented heights or destroy it entirely. The choice we make will determine not just our own fate, but the legacy we leave for future generations who might one day look back at our monuments and wonder what we knew, what we understood, and what wisdom we preserved for them to discover. The mystery of Lemuria, stripped of its fantastic elements and understood as a symbol of lost wisdom and cyclic renewal, offers us a framework for thinking about these challenges. It reminds us that we are not the first to face such choices, that others have walked this path before us and left us clues about how to navigate the difficulties ahead. But ultimately, the responsibility is ours. We must decide whether to repeat the patterns of the past or transcend them, whether to preserve knowledge for future generations or allow it to be lost again, whether to build civilization that can survive the cycles of time or simply add another layer to the archaeological record of failed human experiments. The ancient knowledge is there, waiting for us to develop the sophistication necessary to receive it. The question is whether we have the wisdom to use it well, the humility to learn from those who came before us, and the courage to break the cycles of rise and fall that have defined human history for thousands of years. The choice is ours, and the time to make it is now. Because if the patterns of the past are any guide, the window of opportunity for making such choices is always shorter than we think, and the consequences of our decisions will echo through time long after our own civilization has become another mystery for future archaeologists to puzzle over. But that's a story for our next exploration, where we'll dive even deeper into the evidence for these ancient knowledge networks and examine what their existence might mean for our understanding of human potential and cosmic destiny. The pieces of this cosmic puzzle become even more intriguing when we examine what happened to these knowledge networks during periods of catastrophic change. Because here's what the evidence suggests. These weren't just passive repositories of information, they were active systems designed to respond to crisis. When disaster struck, they didn't simply preserve knowledge, they strategically dispersed it, ensuring that crucial understanding would survive even if entire civilizations were wiped out. Take the mysterious migrations that appear in the historical record during periods of environmental upheaval. Around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the Younger Dryas period, we see sudden population movements across every continent. Groups of people carrying advanced knowledge appeared in regions where they had no apparent historical presence, establishing new settlements and introducing sophisticated technologies that local populations had never seen before. The Solitarian culture of Western Europe, for example, possessed advanced stoneworking techniques and maritime capabilities that allowed them to navigate Atlantic waters during the Ice Age. Their toolkit included specialized weapons and tools that appear nowhere else in the archaeological record, yet show striking similarities to technologies that wouldn't appear in other regions for thousands of years. Then, abruptly, they vanished from the European record, only to have their distinctive techniques appear among Native American populations on the other side of the Atlantic. This pattern repeats across the globe during the same time period. Advanced metallurgy appears simultaneously in regions that supposedly had no contact with each other. Sophisticated astronomical knowledge emerges in cultures that had previously shown no evidence of systematic sky observation. Complex mathematical concepts appear in the traditions of peoples who allegedly had no writing systems to preserve such information. The conventional explanation for these phenomena is independent invention, the idea that similar environmental pressures naturally lead to similar solutions. But this explanation breaks down when you examine the specific details. We're not talking about general similarities, but identical techniques, identical mathematical relationships, and identical astronomical observations that appear with precision timing across vast distances. What emerges is a picture of coordinated knowledge transfer during periods of crisis, as if groups of specialists, carriers of advanced understanding, deliberately dispersed across the globe when their original civilization was threatened, taking their expertise to regions where it could take root and flourish in new forms. This dispersal strategy wasn't random or chaotic. The evidence suggests it was systematic and planned, with different groups carrying different aspects of the total knowledge base to ensure that no single catastrophe could eliminate all understanding. Some groups carried mathematical and astronomical knowledge, others preserved engineering and construction techniques. Still others maintained understanding of consciousness and healing arts. The result was a global network of specialized knowledge keepers who could operate independently when necessary but also coordinate their efforts when conditions allowed. They weren't trying to recreate their original civilization exactly, but to preserve its essential insights while adapting to new environments and circumstances. This adaptive approach explains why we find similar principles expressed through different cultural forms around the world. The underlying mathematics remain consistent, but the symbolic systems used to express them vary according to local conditions and aesthetic preferences. The astronomical alignments follow identical principles, but the monuments that embody them reflect the materials and architectural styles available in different regions. It's like a vast game of telephone played across continents and millennia, where the core message remains intact even as its surface expression changes with each transmission. The mathematical constants encoded in the Great Pyramid appear again in the proportions of Angkor Wat and the layout of Teotihuacan. The astronomical principles demonstrated at Stonehenge resurface in the alignments of temples in India and the calendar systems of Mesoamerica. But here's where this story takes a turn that will fundamentally challenge how you think about the development of human knowledge. Because the evidence suggests these ancient dispersal networks didn't just preserve existing information, they actively developed new understanding by connecting insights that had been separated by geography and specialization. When groups carrying different aspects of ancient knowledge encountered each other, they created synthesis opportunities that led to breakthrough discoveries. The mathematical insights preserved by one group combined with the astronomical observations maintained by another to produce new understanding that exceeded what either group possessed individually. The engineering techniques of one tradition merged with the consciousness practices of another to create hybrid approaches that opened entirely new possibilities. This cross-pollination effect appears throughout the archaeological record in the form of sudden technological leaps that can't be explained through gradual development. The Bronze Age, for example, didn't emerge slowly through trial and error experimentation with metal alloys. It appeared rapidly and simultaneously across multiple regions, with sophisticated smelting techniques and complex alloy formulations that suggest the merger of previously separate knowledge traditions. The same pattern appears in the development of writing systems, agricultural techniques, and architectural methods. Instead of slow evolution from simple to complex, we see sudden appearances of fully developed technologies that seem to combine elements from multiple sources, as if different groups had been developing different pieces of the puzzle independently, then came together to assemble the complete picture. This collaborative approach to knowledge development has profound implications for how we understand human intellectual capacity. Instead of viewing ancient peoples as primitive individuals struggling to make sense of their world through limited observation and crude reasoning, we see them as participants in a vast, multi-generational research project that spanned continents and millennia. They weren't starting from scratch with each generation, but building on accumulated understanding that had been preserved and transmitted through sophisticated systems specifically designed for long-term knowledge maintenance. They had access to observational data collected over thousands of years, mathematical insights developed through centuries of systematic investigation, and experimental results from countless trials and refinements. The megalithic monuments scattered across the globe weren't just individual achievements. They were components of a global research network. Each site was both a practical tool for local use and a data collection station, contributing to a larger understanding of planetary and cosmic systems. The astronomical alignments weren't just symbolic gestures toward the heavens, but precise instruments for gathering information about celestial mechanics that would be compiled and analyzed by specialists across the network. This research network operated according to principles that we're only now beginning to appreciate in modern science. The importance of long-term data collection, the value of multiple observation points for triangulating complex phenomena, and the necessity of systematic information sharing for advancing understanding beyond what any individual or single location could achieve. The knowledge they accumulated through this process wasn't primitive superstition or lucky guesswork. It was sophisticated science conducted using methods specifically adapted to the technological capabilities and environmental conditions of their time. They couldn't build electronic instruments or launch satellites, so they created stone computers and Earth-based observatories. They couldn't transmit data electronically, so they developed symbolic systems and architectural codes that could preserve and communicate complex information across vast distances and time periods. The results of their research are encoded in the monuments they left behind, waiting for us to develop sufficient sophistication to decode them. Each new breakthrough in our understanding of mathematics, astronomy, or physics reveals additional layers of meaning in ancient sites, showing us that the builders understood principles we're only now discovering. The precession calculations embedded in the Giza complex, for example, demonstrate knowledge of celestial mechanics that requires continuous observation spanning thousands of years. The acoustic properties of chambers in ancient temples show understanding of resonance phenomena that we've only recently begun to investigate scientifically. The mathematical relationships encoded in megalithic monuments reveal insights into the fundamental structure of space and time that parallel discoveries in modern theoretical physics. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this ancient research network was its understanding of consciousness and its role in accessing information. Because the evidence suggests these civilizations didn't just rely on external observation and mechanical calculation, they also developed sophisticated techniques for using human consciousness as a research instrument. The mystery schools and initiation practices that appear in every ancient culture weren't just religious ceremonies or social rituals. They were training programs designed to enhance human perceptual and cognitive capabilities, allowing specially prepared individuals to access information through non-ordinary means. The techniques they developed, meditation, breathing practices, sensory isolation, rhythmic movement, sound therapy, were specifically designed to alter brain function in ways that expanded awareness and enhanced access to subtle information fields. Modern neuroscience is beginning to validate these approaches, showing that the consciousness techniques preserved in ancient traditions actually do produce measurable changes in brain function that enhance pattern recognition, intuitive insight, and access to normally unconscious processing. The shamanic practices of indigenous cultures, the yogic traditions of India, the mystery school initiations of ancient Egypt and Greece, all represent sophisticated applications of principles about consciousness that we're only now beginning to understand scientifically. This suggests that ancient research networks operated using a hybrid methodology that combined external observation with internal investigation, mechanical instruments with consciousness techniques, collective data gathering with individual insight. They understood that human awareness itself could function as a sensitive instrument for detecting patterns and relationships that might not be apparent through purely external observation. The implications of this approach are staggering. If consciousness can indeed access information through non-local means, if human awareness has capabilities that extend beyond the limitations of sensory perception, then the ancient knowledge networks had access to data sources that we're only beginning to recognize. They could investigate questions that we consider unanswerable and explore realms that we dismiss as unscientific. This expanded methodology might explain how they achieved insights that seem impossible given their supposed technological limitations, how they calculated astronomical constants without electronic computers, how they understood mathematical relationships without algebraic notation, how they designed structures with acoustic properties that we're still studying today. They weren't limited to the external tools and instruments that we associate with scientific investigation. They had developed internal technologies, consciousness techniques, that allowed them to directly interface with the information fields that underlie physical reality. They could access the mathematical principles that govern natural systems, the geometric relationships that structure space and time, the rhythmic patterns that coordinate cosmic cycles. This perspective transforms our understanding of what ancient knowledge preservation really means. Instead of simply maintaining static information from past discoveries, these networks were preserving dynamic capabilities, the actual methods and techniques that allow consciousness to access universal principles directly. They weren't just passing down answers, they were transmitting the ability to ask and answer questions that transcend the limitations of any particular time period or technological context. The mystery schools that claimed to maintain ancient wisdom weren't just preserving historical information, they were maintaining functional capabilities that could be applied to new situations and challenges. The geometric principles taught in these traditions weren't just abstract mathematics, they were practical tools for understanding and manipulating the fundamental structures of reality. The consciousness techniques weren't just spiritual practices, they were scientific instruments for investigating realms that external technology couldn't reach. This explains why these traditions have remained relevant across thousands of years of technological and cultural change. The external forms might evolve, the symbolic systems might adapt, but the core capabilities remain constant because they're based on universal principles that don't change with historical circumstances. It also explains why these traditions have been systematically suppressed by authorities who rely on controlling access to information. If consciousness techniques can allow individuals to access knowledge directly, without dependence on external sources or institutional gatekeepers, then they represent a fundamental threat to systems based on information scarcity and expert authority. The destruction of mystery schools, the persecution of consciousness practitioners, the suppression of indigenous knowledge traditions, these aren't random acts of religious or cultural conflict. They're systematic attempts to eliminate alternative sources of knowledge and maintain monopolistic control over information access. But consciousness techniques and the knowledge they provide can't be permanently suppressed because they're based on capabilities that are inherent in human nature itself. They can be driven underground, disguised as entertainment or art, or preserved in fragmentary form, but they always resurface when conditions allow. This is why we see periodic Renaissance periods throughout history, times when ancient knowledge suddenly reappears and catalyzes rapid advancement in human understanding. These aren't just rediscoveries of lost information, they're reactivations of dormant capabilities, moments when enough people simultaneously develop the consciousness skills necessary to access universal principles directly. The Renaissance in Europe, the Golden Age of Islam, the classical period in Greece, the Vedic civilization in India. These represent times when ancient knowledge preservation networks became active again, when the consciousness techniques and information access methods were successfully transmitted to new generations who could apply them to contemporary challenges. We may be entering another such period today. The convergence of quantum physics with consciousness research, the rediscovery of ancient astronomical alignments through satellite technology, the validation of traditional healing methods through modern medical research, all suggest that we're approaching a threshold where ancient knowledge and modern capabilities can be integrated into a new synthesis. But realizing this potential requires more than just recovering lost information or rediscovering ancient techniques. It requires developing the wisdom to use advanced capabilities responsibly, the humility to learn from traditions we've dismissed as primitive, and the courage to challenge assumptions that limit our understanding of human potential. The evidence suggests that we're not just rediscovering ancient knowledge, we're reconnecting with an ongoing tradition of human development that has been maintained across thousands of years through various preservation networks. The techniques are still there, the information is still accessible, the capabilities are still latent in human consciousness, waiting to be reactivated by those who develop sufficient preparation and commitment. The question isn't whether this ancient knowledge exists, but whether we have the clarity to recognize it and the dedication to develop it. Because the consciousness techniques that allow access to universal principles require the same qualities that the ancient traditions emphasized: patience, persistence, humility, and genuine commitment to truth rather than personal advantage. These aren't quick fixes or easy shortcuts to knowledge and power. They're demanding practices that require years of dedicated development and continuous refinement. They demand that we question our assumptions, expand our definition of what's possible, and develop capabilities that our current culture often discourages or dismisses. But for those willing to undertake this development, the rewards are extraordinary. Access to knowledge that transcends the limitations of any particular time period or cultural context. Understanding of principles that remain constant across all changes in external circumstances. Capabilities that allow direct participation in the ongoing evolution of human consciousness and cosmic understanding. This is the true legacy of the ancient knowledge networks, not just information about the past, but tools for navigating the future. Techniques that remain as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago, because they're based on universal principles rather than temporary technological solutions. The builders of the megalithic monuments, the keepers of the mystery traditions, the preservers of ancient wisdom, they weren't just looking backward to a golden age that had passed. They were looking forward to a time when humanity would be ready to reclaim its full potential, when the consciousness techniques they preserved would be needed to navigate challenges that transcended anything their own civilizations had faced. They encoded their knowledge in forms designed to survive any conceivable catastrophe, because they understood that the information would be most needed during times of greatest crisis and change. They built their monuments to cosmic scales because they knew that the principles they embodied would be relevant as long as human consciousness existed to decode them. We stand today at the convergence point they anticipated, possessing both the technological capability to verify their achievements and the growing recognition that consciousness itself might be the key to unlocking mysteries that pure technology cannot solve. The ancient knowledge networks are still active, still accessible to those who develop the appropriate preparation and approach them with genuine respect and commitment. The question that remains is whether we'll have the wisdom to integrate this ancient understanding with our modern capabilities, creating a synthesis that honors both the achievements of the past and the possibilities of the future. Because the ultimate test of any knowledge system isn't how well it explains the past, but how effectively it can guide us toward a future worth creating. And that future, according to the ancient traditions, depends not just on what we know, but on who we become in the process of learning it. The consciousness that can access universal principles is itself transformed by that access, developed through the process of engaging with truth that transcends personal limitations and cultural conditioning. This transformation isn't just individual, it's collective. As more people develop these capabilities, as the ancient knowledge networks become active again, as the consciousness techniques spread and evolve, we approach the possibility of a genuine renaissance in human understanding and capability. But this renaissance won't happen automatically. It requires conscious choice, dedicated effort, and the courage to move beyond the comfortable limitations of conventional thinking. It requires us to become worthy of the knowledge we seek, to develop the character and wisdom necessary to use advanced understanding in service of genuine progress rather than personal advantage. The ancient knowledge is there, waiting for us to develop the sophistication necessary to receive it. The consciousness techniques are preserved, ready to be reactivated by those willing to undertake the necessary preparation. The global network of wisdom keepers is still operational, still maintaining the tradition across time and space. The only question is whether we're ready to step into our role as the next generation of this ancient lineage, carrying forward the torch of human understanding into whatever challenges and opportunities await us in the cycles of time yet to come. The Tamil scholars of southern India possess something extraordinary that connects directly to this ancient network. Deep in their cultural memory lay stories of Kumari Kandam, a vast continent that once extended far south of the Indian subcontinent into the Indian Ocean. This wasn't just another flood legend. It was a sophisticated preservation of geographical knowledge that described specific landmasses, river systems, and cultural centres that had vanished beneath the waves. What makes the Tamil tradition particularly compelling is its precision. These weren't vague myths about a golden age, but detailed accounts of specific cities, trade routes, and intellectual centres that had been lost to rising seas. The text described 3 successive Tamil academies called Sangams, literary and scientific institutions that had preserved knowledge across multiple cycles of destruction and renewal. According to these traditions, the first 2 Sangams had been located on lands that were now underwater, their libraries and scholars lost when the ocean claimed their cities. The survivors of these catastrophes, the Tamil texts claimed, had carried their knowledge inland, establishing new centres of learning and gradually rebuilding their civilization, using wisdom preserved from the submerged world. They maintained detailed genealogies of scholars and poets whose lineages stretched back to the time before the floods, suggesting an unbroken chain of knowledge transmission that spanned thousands of years. Modern archaeology has begun to validate aspects of these traditions. Underwater surveys off the coast of Tamil Nadu have revealed submerged structures that match descriptions in ancient texts. Stone formations, building foundations, and what appear to be harbour installations have been discovered at depth that indicate they were built when sea levels were much lower, exactly as the Tamil legends describe. But here's what makes this evidence truly extraordinary. The Tamil traditions don't just preserve memory of lost lands, they maintain specific technical knowledge that supposedly originated in these submerged civilizations. Advanced mathematical concepts, astronomical calculations, and engineering principles that appear in Tamil texts often lack clear developmental histories within Indian culture itself, as if they were inherited fully formed from external sources. The Tolkappiyam, one of the oldest Tamil grammatical texts, contains mathematical and linguistic principles that demonstrate understanding of complex structural relationships. Centuries before, similar insights appear in other traditions. The Tirukural, an ancient Tamil ethical text, encodes numerical relationships and philosophical concepts that suggest access to knowledge systems far more sophisticated than its supposed time period should allow. These aren't isolated examples. Tamil medical texts describe surgical procedures and pharmacological principles that parallel discoveries in other ancient traditions separated by thousands of miles. Tamil astronomical works contain calculations and observations that match data found in Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Mesoamerican sources. Despite the apparent lack of contact between these cultures, the pattern suggests something profound. The Tamil tradition preserved not just cultural memory of lost lands, but actual knowledge systems that had been developed by the civilizations that inhabited those lands. When Kumari Kandam was submerged, its intellectual heritage survived through carefully maintained transmission lineages that continued to develop and apply ancient understanding to new circumstances. This preservation strategy appears to have been systematic rather than accidental. The Tamil text describes specific methods for maintaining knowledge across catastrophic disruptions, specialized groups responsible for memorizing different categories of information, redundant storage systems that distributed crucial data across multiple locations, and symbolic encoding techniques that could preserve complex understanding in forms that would survive even if the original context was forgotten. The Sangam literature itself demonstrates these preservation techniques in action. The texts are structured using sophisticated mnemonic devices that aid in accurate transmission, mathematical relationships that serve as error-checking mechanisms, and symbolic systems that encode multiple layers of meaning within single verses. They're not just poetry or historical chronicles, They're information storage systems designed to maintain fidelity across generations of oral transmission. This technical sophistication appears throughout Tamil culture in ways that suggest deep familiarity with information theory and systems design. The classical Tamil architectural treatises describe construction methods that account for acoustic properties, astronomical alignments, and structural engineering principles that require advanced mathematical knowledge. The traditional Tamil calendar systems demonstrate understanding of complex astronomical cycles and their interactions with terrestrial phenomena, but perhaps most significantly, the Tamil traditions explicitly connect their knowledge to a global network of wisdom keepers. The texts describe ancient contacts with scholars and navigators from distant lands, intellectual exchanges that maintained connections between preservation centres across vast distances. They speak of maritime routes that link the submerged lands of Kumari Kandam with other centres of learning in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Southeast Asia. These weren't just trade relationships, but active collaboration networks where different groups shared specialised knowledge and coordinated their preservation efforts. The Tamil texts describe how astronomical observations made in one location would be transmitted to scholars in other regions, how mathematical discoveries developed in one tradition would be shared and refined through collaborative investigation, how engineering techniques proven in one environment would be adapted for use in different geographical conditions. This collaborative approach explains why we find such striking similarities between Tamil knowledge systems and those preserved in other ancient traditions. The mathematical constants, astronomical calculations, and architectural principles weren't developed independently by each culture. They were shared discoveries that emerged from coordinated investigation conducted by interconnected networks of specialists. The evidence for these connections appears in the technical details rather than the surface narratives. While the mythological stories and cultural expressions vary dramatically between traditions, the underlying mathematical relationships, astronomical data, and engineering principles remain remarkably consistent. It's as if different cultures were working with the same technical manuals while expressing their contents through different symbolic and narrative frameworks. This pattern becomes even more apparent when we examine how knowledge was transmitted during periods of crisis. The Tamil traditions describe specific protocols for preserving information during catastrophic events, how to identify which knowledge was most crucial for survival, how to select and train individuals capable of maintaining transmission lineages, how to establish new centres of learning using refugees from destroyed civilizations. These weren't theoretical guidelines, but practical procedures that had been tested and refined through actual experience with civilizational collapse. The texts describe how groups of specialists would disperse when their original centres were threatened, carrying different aspects of the total knowledge base to ensure that no single catastrophe could eliminate all understanding. The Tamil scholars who preserved the Kumari Kandam traditions were participants in this dispersal process, inheritors of knowledge systems that had been deliberately scattered to ensure their survival. They maintained their portion of the ancient wisdom while staying connected to other preservation networks through trade routes, scholarly exchanges, and carefully maintained communication channels. This explains why Tamil culture demonstrates such sophisticated understanding of subjects that supposedly required independent development over centuries. They weren't starting from primitive beginnings and gradually discovering advanced principles through trial and error. They were inheritors of knowledge systems that had been developed through coordinated investigation, spanning thousands of years and multiple civilizations. The implications extend far beyond Tamil Nadu or even Indian civilization. If the Kumari Kandam traditions accurately preserve memory of actual knowledge networks that operated across the Indian Ocean, then similar preservation systems might have existed in other regions that experienced comparable catastrophic flooding at the end of the Ice Age. The Pacific Ocean, for instance, contains numerous island cultures that maintain traditions of submerged lands and lost civilizations. The Polynesian navigational knowledge that allowed them to traverse vast ocean distances using only traditional techniques suggests access to understanding that would have taken many generations to develop through local observation alone. Their oral traditions describe ancient homelands that were lost to rising seas, forcing migrations that spread their knowledge across the Pacific basin. The Aboriginal Australians maintain Dreamtime stories that describe vast land bridges and extended coastlines that were submerged when the waters rose. Their traditional knowledge systems demonstrate understanding of continental-scale geological processes, astronomical cycles, and ecological relationships that span tens of thousands of years. Like the Tamil traditions, these appear to preserve memories of knowledge networks that operated across much larger geographical areas than their current territories. The Native American cultures of the Pacific Northwest tell stories of great floods that forced migrations from coastal regions to inland areas, carrying with them knowledge of navigation, astronomy, and natural sciences that enabled them to adapt to entirely new environments. Their traditional techniques for resource management, weather prediction, and astronomical observation demonstrate sophisticated understanding that seems to exceed what could have been developed through purely local experience. Each of these traditions, when examined carefully, reveals evidence of knowledge inheritance rather than independent development. The technical sophistication appears too early, the understanding too comprehensive, the connections too precise to explain through gradual local discovery. They all point to participation in larger systems of knowledge development and preservation that operated across oceanic distances and geological timescales. But here's where this investigation takes a turn that will challenge everything you think you know about the development of human consciousness itself, because the evidence suggests these ancient knowledge networks weren't just preserving technical information about mathematics, astronomy, and engineering. They were maintaining understanding of consciousness techniques and awareness practices that allowed direct access to information fields that transcend the limitations of individual brains and sensory systems. The Tamil traditions, like those of other ancient cultures, describe meditation practices, breathing techniques, and awareness exercises that were specifically designed to enhance human perceptual capabilities. These weren't just spiritual practices or religious rituals, they were sophisticated technologies for expanding consciousness and accessing information through non-ordinary means. The Siddha tradition of Tamil Nadu, for instance, maintains detailed knowledge of techniques for altering brain function and expanding awareness that produce measurable physiological changes. Modern neuroscience is beginning to validate these approaches, showing that the consciousness practices preserved in ancient traditions actually do enhance pattern recognition, intuitive insight, and access to normally unconscious processing. The Tamil texts describe how these consciousness techniques were used as research tools, allowing practitioners to investigate questions that couldn't be answered through external observation alone. They speak of methods for accessing the mathematical principles that govern natural systems, for understanding the geometric relationships that structure space and time, for perceiving the rhythmic patterns that coordinate cosmic cycles. This wasn't mystical speculation, but practical methodology. The ancient knowledge networks operated using hybrid approaches that combined external observation with internal investigation, mechanical instruments with consciousness techniques, collective data gathering with individual insight. They understood that human awareness itself could function as a sensitive instrument for detecting patterns and relationships that might not be apparent through purely external means. This expanded methodology explains how they achieved insights that seem impossible given their supposed technological limitations. They weren't limited to the external tools and instruments that we associate with scientific investigation. They had developed internal technologies that allowed them to interface directly with the information fields that underlie physical reality. The Tamil mathematical traditions, for example, describe techniques for accessing numerical relationships through contemplative practices that bypass rational calculation. Practitioners would enter specific states of consciousness that allowed them to perceive mathematical constants and geometric principles directly, then verify their insights through external calculation and practical application. The astronomical knowledge preserved in Tamil texts often describes observations that would have been impossible using purely visual methods, yet the data proves accurate when checked against modern measurements. The texts suggest that these observations were made using consciousness techniques that enhance perceptual sensitivity and allowed detection of subtle phenomena that normal awareness couldn't access. The engineering principles embedded in Tamil architectural traditions demonstrate understanding of structural dynamics, acoustic properties, and energy flow patterns that seem to require direct perception of forces and relationships that aren't visible to ordinary observation. The builders appear to have used consciousness techniques to perceive how energy moves through structures, how sound waves interact with geometric forms, how astronomical influences affect the stability and function of buildings. These capabilities weren't unique to Tamil culture. Similar consciousness technologies appear in every tradition that claims to preserve ancient knowledge. The Egyptian mystery schools, the Vedic traditions of India, the shamanic practices of indigenous cultures, the contemplative methods of various mystical traditions, all describe techniques for expanding awareness and accessing information through non-ordinary means. What's remarkable is the consistency of these methods across cultures that supposedly developed independently. The breathing techniques, the meditation practices, the sensory isolation methods, the use of sound and rhythm to alter consciousness, these approaches appear with striking similarity in traditions separated by thousands of miles and centuries of time. This consistency suggests that consciousness itself operates according to universal principles that remain constant across cultural and historical variations. The techniques for accessing expanded awareness aren't arbitrary cultural inventions, but applications of natural laws that govern the relationship between consciousness and information. Modern research is beginning to validate this understanding. Studies of meditation show that specific practices produce predictable changes in brain function that enhance cognitive capabilities. Research into altered states of consciousness demonstrates that human awareness can access information through channels that classical neuroscience can't explain. Investigations of psychic phenomena suggest that consciousness might have capabilities that extend far beyond the limitations of individual brains. If consciousness can indeed access information through non-local means, if human awareness has capabilities that transcend sensory perception and rational analysis, then the ancient knowledge networks had access to data sources that we're only beginning to recognize. They could investigate questions that we consider unanswerable and explore realms that we dismiss as unscientific. This perspective transforms our understanding of what ancient wisdom really represents. Instead of primitive superstitions or lucky guesses, we see sophisticated applications of consciousness technologies that allow direct investigation of universal principles. The mathematical insights, astronomical observations, and engineering achievements weren't just products of external experimentation, but results of systematic investigation using expanded awareness as a research instrument. The preservation of these consciousness techniques becomes even more crucial than the maintenance of specific technical information. Because while external knowledge can become obsolete as circumstances change, the ability to access universal principles directly remains relevant regardless of technological or cultural context. The consciousness methods that allowed ancient investigators to perceive mathematical constants, astronomical relationships, and natural laws can be applied to contemporary questions and challenges with equal effectiveness. This explains why the mystery traditions that claim to preserve ancient wisdom have remained relevant across thousands of years of technological and social change. They're not just maintaining historical information, but preserving functional capabilities that can be applied to new situations and problems. The consciousness techniques aren't museum pieces, but living tools that can be used to investigate current challenges and develop solutions that transcend the limitations of purely external approaches. The Tamil traditions, like other authentic wisdom lineages, maintain these consciousness technologies alongside their technical knowledge. The meditation practices, breathing techniques, and awareness exercises are integrated with mathematical understanding, astronomical observation, and practical application. They represent complete systems for human development that enhance both intellectual capability and perceptual sensitivity. This integration is crucial because consciousness techniques without technical knowledge can lead to fantasy and delusion, while technical knowledge without consciousness development often results in narrow specialization and inability to perceive larger patterns and relationships. The ancient knowledge networks understood that genuine wisdom requires both external competence and internal development, both technical skill and expanded awareness. The evidence suggests that we're now approaching a threshold where these ancient consciousness technologies can be integrated with modern scientific methods to create hybrid approaches that combine the best of both traditional and contemporary investigation. Quantum physics is revealing that consciousness might play a fundamental role in physical reality. Neuroscience is showing that awareness can be systematically enhanced through specific practices. Information theory is demonstrating that knowledge might be accessible through non-local channels that transcend individual brains. The convergence of these discoveries with preserved ancient techniques creates unprecedented opportunities for breakthrough understanding. But realizing this potential requires more than just intellectual recognition of the possibilities. It demands actual development of consciousness capabilities through dedicated practice and systematic training. This is where the ancient preservation networks become relevant not just as historical curiosities, but as practical resources for contemporary development. The techniques are still there, maintained by lineages that have preserved them across centuries of cultural change. The knowledge is still accessible to those who develop sufficient preparation and approach it with appropriate commitment and respect. The Tamil traditions, along with other authentic wisdom lineages, offer pathways for this development, but they require the same qualities that the ancient traditions emphasized: patience, persistence, humility, and genuine dedication to truth rather than personal advantage. These aren't quick fixes or easy shortcuts, but demanding practices that transform both understanding and consciousness through sustained engagement. The question isn't whether this ancient knowledge exists, but whether we have the clarity to recognize it and the commitment to develop it. Because the consciousness techniques that allow access to universal principles can't be learned through intellectual study alone. They require direct experience, systematic practice, and gradual development of capabilities that our current culture often discourages or dismisses. But for those willing to undertake this development, the rewards extend far beyond personal benefit. Each individual who develops these capabilities becomes a node in the ancient knowledge network, contributing to the preservation and evolution of understanding that transcends any particular time period or cultural context. They become participants in an ongoing tradition of human development that connects the wisdom of the past with the possibilities of the future. This is the true significance of the Lemuria hypothesis and its connection to traditions like Kumari Kandam. Not just evidence of lost civilizations or submerged continents, but recognition that human consciousness itself might be the key to accessing knowledge that transcends the limitations of any particular technological or cultural framework. The ancient knowledge networks are still active, still accessible, still offering pathways for development that remain as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. The only question is whether we're ready to step beyond the comfortable limitations of conventional thinking and engage with possibilities that could transform not just our understanding, but our very nature as conscious beings. Because ultimately, that's what this investigation reveals. Not just evidence of lost civilizations or preserved ancient knowledge, but recognition that human potential itself might be far greater than we've been taught to believe. The consciousness that can access universal principles, that can perceive mathematical relationships directly, that can investigate the fundamental structure of reality through expanded awareness, that consciousness exists within each of us, waiting to be developed through appropriate training and application. The ancient knowledge keepers understood this potential and created systematic methods for its development. They encoded their techniques in traditions that could survive any conceivable catastrophe, because they knew that the capability to access universal understanding was humanity's greatest treasure, more valuable than any external knowledge or technological achievement. Today, as we stand at the threshold of unprecedented global challenges and extraordinary technological capabilities, we need this understanding more than ever. The problems we face require solutions that transcend the limitations of purely external approaches. The opportunities before us demand wisdom that integrates technical competence with expanded awareness, practical skill with deeper understanding of the principles that govern both consciousness and reality. The ancient knowledge networks offer us pathways toward this integration, but only if we're willing to develop the capabilities necessary to access them. The choice is ours, and the time to make it is now, before the window of opportunity closes and we find ourselves repeating the cycles of rise and fall that have characterized human civilization for thousands of years. The evidence is there, waiting for us to develop the sophistication necessary to recognize it. The techniques are preserved, ready to be reactivated by those willing to undertake the necessary preparation. The network of wisdom keepers is still operational, still maintaining the tradition across time and space. All that remains is for us to step into our role as the next generation of this ancient lineage, carrying forward the torch of human understanding into whatever challenges and opportunities await us in the cycles of time yet to come. The underground city of Telos beneath Mount Shasta represents something far more significant than most people realize. Because when you examine the accounts of this hidden civilization, when you strip away the New Age romanticism and focus on the core claims, you discover something that connects directly to the knowledge preservation networks we've been exploring. The Lemurians who supposedly established Telos weren't just refugees from a sunken continent, they were carriers of a complete technological and consciousness-based civilization that had developed solutions to problems we're still struggling with today. According to the most detailed accounts, Telos operates as a 5-level underground metropolis with a population of over 1.5 million beings. The city is described as being powered entirely by crystal technology that harnesses Earth's natural energy fields, creating a completely sustainable civilization that has maintained itself for over 12,000 years without depleting its environment or creating waste products that damage the ecosystem. But here's what makes these descriptions truly extraordinary. The technology described in Telos accounts matches principles that quantum physics is only now beginning to understand. The crystal-based energy systems supposedly use resonance frequencies to tap into what modern science calls zero-point energy fields. The transportation systems within the city allegedly operate using magnetic levitation principles that eliminate friction and allow movement without burning fossil fuels. The agricultural systems reportedly use frequency modulation to accelerate plant growth and enhance nutritional content without genetic manipulation or chemical additives. These aren't random fantasy elements cobbled together from science fiction movies. They represent sophisticated understanding of energy principles, consciousness applications, and sustainable technology that addresses every major challenge facing modern civilization. If even a fraction of these capabilities actually exist, if there's any truth to the preservation of advanced knowledge within hidden communities, then we're looking at solutions to climate change, resource depletion, and environmental degradation that could transform human civilization within a single generation. The Telos accounts describe inhabitants who have developed human potential far beyond current norms. 7-foot-tall beings with extended lifespans who maintain perfect health through understanding of energy medicine and consciousness-based healing. Individuals who can communicate telepathically across vast distances, access information through direct mental interface with crystalline storage systems, and manipulate physical matter through focused intention combined with technological amplification. Again, these descriptions might sound like pure fantasy, but they align remarkably with discoveries in consciousness research, quantum field theory, and biofield science that suggest human awareness might have capabilities far beyond what conventional science has recognized. The technologies supposedly used in Telos represent practical applications of consciousness-matter interactions that researchers are just beginning to investigate in laboratory settings. What's particularly intriguing is how these accounts connect to the broader network of underground civilizations that appear in traditions around the world. The Agartha network, which supposedly includes over 100 hidden cities connected by tunnel systems and governed from a capital called Shambhala, represents a global preservation system that mirrors the knowledge networks we've been examining. Each city in this network is described as specializing in different aspects of advanced understanding. Telos focuses on consciousness development and energy technology. Posid in Brazil maintains Atlantean maritime knowledge and crystal sciences. Rama in India preserves Vedic mathematical and astronomical understanding. Shambhala serves as a coordination center, where information from all the specialized communities is integrated, and long-term planning for human development is conducted. The descriptions of this network match exactly what you would expect if advanced civilizations had survived previous catastrophes by moving underground, maintaining their knowledge while staying hidden from surface populations that had reverted to more primitive conditions. The specialization ensures that no single disaster could eliminate all understanding, while the coordination prevents knowledge from fragmenting into isolated traditions that might lose essential connections. But here's where this investigation takes a turn that will fundamentally challenge your understanding of current world events. Because if these preservation networks actually exist, if there are communities that maintained advanced understanding through previous cycles of civilizational collapse, then they would be uniquely positioned to assess humanity's current trajectory and intervene when necessary to prevent another catastrophic reset. The accounts of contact between surface dwellers and these hidden civilizations describe exactly this kind of intervention. Not dramatic public revelations or massive technological transfers, but subtle guidance provided to individuals who demonstrate readiness for expanded understanding. Scientists who receive inspiration for breakthrough discoveries, inventors who develop technologies that seem to emerge from nowhere, spiritual teachers who access knowledge that transcends their apparent backgrounds and training. The pattern suggests a careful strategy for gradually reintroducing advanced understanding to surface civilization, timed to coincide with humanity's development of sufficient wisdom to use such knowledge responsibly. The consciousness techniques that allow access to expanded awareness, the energy technologies that could solve environmental crises, the mathematical insights that could revolutionize physics and engineering, all of these capabilities might be emerging now because we're approaching a threshold where they're desperately needed, and might actually be applied constructively rather than destructively. This perspective transforms how we understand the current explosion of interest in consciousness research alternative energy, ancient wisdom traditions, and anomalous archaeological discoveries. These aren't random cultural trends or isolated scientific developments, they're coordinated elements of a systematic reintroduction of knowledge that has been carefully preserved and is now being strategically released. The individuals who find themselves drawn to investigate these subjects, who feel compelled to develop consciousness techniques, or explore alternative energy systems or study ancient monuments, might be responding to subtle guidance from preservation networks that recognize their potential to contribute to this reintegration process. The sudden appearance of breakthrough insights, the mysterious synchronicities that guide research in productive directions, the intuitive leaps that lead to major discoveries, all of these phenomena could represent assistance from communities that possess complete understanding of the principles being rediscovered. But this assistance comes with a test, because advanced knowledge without corresponding wisdom development has consistently led to civilizational collapse throughout human history. The preservation networks, if they exist, would be acutely aware of this pattern and would only provide access to powerful capabilities for individuals who demonstrate sufficient maturity and ethical development to use them constructively. This explains why consciousness development is emphasized so strongly in all authentic wisdom traditions. It's not just about personal spiritual growth or individual enlightenment, it's about developing the character and awareness necessary to handle advanced knowledge responsibly. The meditation practices, ethical training, and service orientation that appear in every genuine mystery school tradition aren't arbitrary requirements. They're essential preparation for capabilities that could be either tremendously beneficial or catastrophically dangerous depending on how they're applied. The evidence suggests we're now in a crucial period where this testing process is accelerating. Individuals around the world are experiencing expanded awareness, accessing unusual insights, and developing capabilities that seem to transcend normal human limitations. But they're also facing intense challenges that test their commitment to using these developments for genuine service, rather than personal advantage. Those who pass these tests, who demonstrate consistent dedication to truth and service regardless of personal cost, appear to receive increasing access to knowledge and capabilities that allow them to contribute more effectively to the reintegration process. They become bridges between the preserved ancient wisdom and contemporary human needs, translating universal principles into forms that can be understood and applied by current civilization. This creates a rapidly expanding network of individuals who are connected not through external organization, but through shared commitment to facilitating humanity's development beyond the cycles of rise and fall that have characterized previous eras. They work in every field imaginable: science, technology, education, healing, arts, business, gradually introducing advanced understanding through their professional activities while maintaining the discretion necessary to avoid triggering premature rejection or misuse of powerful knowledge. The result is a transformation process that appears to be happening spontaneously, but is actually being carefully guided by intelligence that understands both the ancient wisdom traditions and the specific requirements of contemporary circumstances. New discoveries that solve critical problems, breakthrough technologies that emerge just when they're needed most, consciousness developments that prepare humanity for expanded capabilities, all coordinated to create maximum positive impact while minimizing the risk of destructive applications. But here's the crucial point. This process requires active participation from surface civilization itself. The preservation networks, however advanced they might be, cannot simply impose solutions on humanity from outside. The knowledge and capabilities must be genuinely understood and integrated by individuals who choose to develop themselves sufficiently to receive and apply them responsibly. This is why the consciousness techniques preserved in ancient traditions are becoming so important today. They're not just historical curiosities or spiritual practices, they're essential preparation for capabilities that humanity desperately needs but can only access through appropriate development. The meditation methods that expand awareness, the ethical training that develops wisdom, the service practices that cultivate genuine care for others, these represent prerequisite development for advanced knowledge that could either solve our greatest challenges or amplify our most dangerous tendencies. The choice is ours, individually and collectively. We can continue operating according to the patterns that have led to repeated civilizational collapse, focusing on external technology without corresponding consciousness development, pursuing power and advantage without regard for long-term consequences. Or we can embrace the development process that the ancient wisdom traditions have always emphasized, treating consciousness expansion and ethical maturity as the foundation for any genuine advancement. The evidence suggests that the knowledge preservation networks are ready to provide whatever assistance we're prepared to receive. The ancient wisdom is available, the consciousness techniques are preserved, the technological solutions exist. But accessing them requires more than intellectual curiosity or even desperate need. It requires becoming the kind of people who can be trusted with capabilities that could reshape the world. This transformation isn't just about individual development, though that's where it begins. It's about creating a new kind of human civilization that integrates the best achievements of the past with unprecedented capabilities for the future, a civilization that understands cosmic cycles and prepares for them rather than being surprised by them, a civilization that develops consciousness as systematically as it develops technology, a civilization that thinks in terms of geological timescales rather than quarterly profit reports. The builders of the ancient monuments understood this long-term perspective. They created structures designed to last for tens of thousands of years because they knew that genuine advancement requires thinking beyond immediate circumstances. They encoded their knowledge in forms that could survive any conceivable catastrophe because they understood that consciousness and wisdom are more valuable than any external achievement. Today we face the same choice they faced, whether to build for eternity or settle for temporary advantage, whether to develop the capabilities necessary for genuine advancement or repeat the patterns that have limited human potential for thousands of years, whether to become worthy of the knowledge we seek or remain trapped in cycles of ignorance and conflict. The ancient knowledge networks are still active, still offering guidance to those who demonstrate readiness to receive it. The consciousness techniques that allow access to universal principles are still preserved in traditions that have maintained them across centuries of cultural change. The technological solutions that could solve our greatest challenges are still available to those who develop sufficient wisdom to apply them constructively. But time is limited. The cosmic cycles that the ancient builders tracked so carefully suggest that we're approaching another period of major transition, another testing point where human civilization either advances to a new level of capability or experiences another collapse and reset. The choices we make in the next few decades will determine which outcome manifests. The preservation networks understand this timing and are making unprecedented efforts to provide assistance. The knowledge that was once carefully guarded and revealed only to specially prepared initiates is now becoming available to anyone who demonstrates genuine commitment to truth and service. The consciousness techniques that were once the exclusive province of mystery schools are now being taught openly to individuals who show readiness to develop them responsibly. This democratization of ancient wisdom represents both an extraordinary opportunity and a critical test. We have access to understanding that previous generations could only dream of, but we also have the responsibility to prove that we can use it wisely. The outcome depends not on external circumstances or technological developments, but on our willingness to undertake the consciousness development that genuine advancement requires. The evidence is overwhelming that we stand at a crossroads of extraordinary significance. The ancient knowledge is emerging, the consciousness techniques are spreading, the technological solutions are appearing. But whether these developments lead to breakthrough or breakdown depends entirely on our response to them. Whether we approach them with wisdom or folly, with service or selfishness, with long-term thinking or short-term gratification, the builders of the megalithic monuments, the keepers of the mystery traditions, the preservers of ancient wisdom across cycles of destruction and renewal, they all face similar choices. Some chose wisely and created legacies that have endured for thousands of years. Others chose poorly and became cautionary examples of civilizations that possessed great knowledge but lacked the wisdom to use it constructively. We have the benefit of their experience, encoded in the monuments they built and the traditions they preserved. We can learn from their successes and avoid their mistakes, but only if we develop the consciousness necessary to recognize the patterns, understand the principles, and apply the lessons they've left for us. The ancient knowledge networks are waiting for our response. The preservation systems are ready to share whatever we're prepared to receive. The consciousness techniques are available to transform us into the kind of beings who can handle advanced capabilities responsibly. The question that remains is whether we'll seize this opportunity or let it pass by, whether we'll rise to meet the challenge of our time or repeat the patterns that have limited human potential for far too long. The choice is ours, but the window of opportunity won't remain open indefinitely. The cosmic cycles continue their ancient rhythm, and the next major transition approaches whether we're ready for it or not. The only question is whether we'll meet it as conscious participants in our own evolution, or as unconscious victims of forces we failed to understand and prepare for. The ancient builders chose consciousness, they chose wisdom, they chose to think beyond their immediate circumstances and build for eternity. Now it's our turn to make the same choice, to prove ourselves worthy of the knowledge they preserved, and to carry the torch of human understanding into whatever future awaits us. But that future won't be determined by external circumstances or technological developments. It will be shaped by the choices we make about who we become in the process of seeking knowledge, what we do with the capabilities we develop, and how we respond to the tests that determine whether we're ready for the next phase of human evolution. The ancient knowledge is there, waiting for us to develop the sophistication necessary to receive it. The consciousness techniques are preserved, ready to transform us into beings capable of handling advanced understanding responsibly. The technological solutions exist, waiting for us to develop the wisdom necessary to apply them constructively. All that remains is for us to make the choice. Will we embrace the development process that genuine advancement requires, or will we settle for the limitations that have constrained human potential for far too long? Will we prove ourselves worthy of the knowledge we seek, or will we remain trapped in cycles of ignorance and conflict that have characterized so much of human history? The answer to that question will determine not just our own fate, but the legacy we leave for future generations who might one day look back at our monuments and wonder what we knew, what we understood, and what wisdom we preserved for them to discover. The choice is ours, and the time to make it is now. Because the truth is, this isn't just about ancient history or lost continents anymore. This is about recognizing that we're living through the most crucial moment in human development since those first knowledge keepers decided to preserve their wisdom for future generations who might be ready to receive it. Right now, as you listen to these words, consciousness researchers are validating meditation techniques that Lemurian traditions claimed could access universal information fields. Quantum physicists are discovering that reality operates according to principles that ancient builders encoded in their monuments thousands of years ago. Archaeologists are uncovering evidence that sophisticated civilizations existed precisely when and where the old legends said they would be found. The convergence isn't coincidental. We're approaching the completion of a cycle that began when the first preservation networks went underground, when the original knowledge keepers made the decision to hide their understanding until humanity developed sufficient wisdom to use it constructively rather than destructively. But here's what most people don't realize. Accessing this knowledge isn't just about intellectual understanding or academic research. The consciousness techniques that allow genuine connection to these ancient wisdom streams require the same qualities that every authentic tradition has always emphasized. Patience to develop capabilities that unfold gradually rather than instantly. Humility to recognize that we might not know as much as we think we do. Service orientation that prioritizes collective benefit over personal advantage. These aren't arbitrary spiritual requirements imposed by ancient teachers who wanted to make things difficult. They're practical necessities for handling information and capabilities that could either elevate human civilization to unprecedented heights or destroy it entirely depending on the consciousness of those who access them. The evidence suggests we're being tested right now. Every individual who feels drawn to investigate these mysteries, who experiences expanded awareness or unusual insights, who finds themselves developing capabilities that seem to transcend normal limitations, is participating in a selection process that determines who will have access to the next level of understanding. Those who approach these developments with genuine dedication to truth, who maintain ethical standards regardless of external pressures, who consistently choose service over selfishness, appear to receive increasing guidance and support from sources that understand both the ancient wisdom and contemporary requirements. But those who seek power for its own sake, who want quick results without corresponding development, who try to exploit advanced knowledge for personal advantage, find themselves encountering obstacles and limitations that prevent them from accessing anything truly dangerous or transformative. This filtering process isn't imposed by external authorities, but emerges naturally from the structure of consciousness itself. The same awareness that can access universal principles automatically excludes motivations and intentions that would misuse such access. It's a built-in safety mechanism that ensures advanced capabilities can only be developed by individuals who will use them responsibly. The ancient knowledge networks understood this principle and designed their preservation systems accordingly. The information was encoded in forms that could only be decoded by consciousness that had developed sufficient maturity and wisdom. The techniques were structured so they could only be mastered by individuals who had proven their commitment to truth and service through sustained practice and ethical development. This is why the consciousness traditions that claim to preserve ancient wisdom have remained relevant across thousands of years of technological and cultural change. They're not just maintaining historical information, but preserving functional capabilities that automatically adapt to whatever circumstances they encounter, while maintaining their essential integrity and safety protocols. Today, as these preservation systems become active again, as the ancient knowledge begins to surface and consciousness techniques spread beyond traditional boundaries, we have an unprecedented opportunity to participate in the next phase of human development, but only if we approach it with the same dedication and integrity that allowed the original knowledge keepers to preserve their understanding through cycles of destruction and renewal. The choice we make, individually and collectively, will determine whether this emergence of ancient wisdom catalyzes a genuine renaissance in human capability and consciousness, or whether it becomes another chapter in the recurring story of advanced knowledge being lost because those who possessed it lack the wisdom to use it constructively. The cosmic cycles that the ancient builders tracked continue their relentless progression. The window of opportunity for conscious participation in our own evolution won't remain open indefinitely, and the next major transition in planetary and human development approaches whether we're prepared for it or not. But unlike previous civilizations that face similar crossroads, we have access to the accumulated wisdom of all those who came before us. The knowledge preservation networks have maintained their vigil across millennia, carefully protecting and gradually revealing understanding that could help us navigate challenges that destroyed previous attempts at advanced civilization. The mathematical constants encoded in megalithic monuments, the consciousness techniques preserved in wisdom traditions, the technological principles hidden in ancient texts, the astronomical knowledge embedded in sacred architecture, all of this represents a vast library of practical information about how to build sustainable, conscious civilization that can survive and thrive across cosmic timescales. The question isn't whether this knowledge exists or whether it's accessible to us today. The evidence for both is overwhelming. The question is whether we have the wisdom to recognize it, the dedication to develop ourselves sufficiently to receive it, and the integrity to apply it in service of genuine advancement rather than temporary advantage. Because ultimately, what determines the fate of any civilization isn't its technological capabilities or external circumstances, but the consciousness of the individuals who comprise it. The same knowledge that could solve our greatest challenges could also amplify our most destructive tendencies if it's approached with the wrong motivations or insufficient preparation. The ancient builders understood this principle and made it the foundation of their entire approach to knowledge preservation and transmission. They didn't just encode technical information in their monuments and traditions. They created developmental systems that ensure such information can only be accessed by consciousness that has proven its readiness to handle it responsibly. This is the ultimate test we face today, not whether we can rediscover ancient knowledge or develop advanced capabilities, but whether we can become the kind of people who deserve access to such understanding, whether we can transform ourselves into conscious participants in our own evolution, rather than unconscious victims of forces we don't understand. The evidence suggests that many individuals around the world are rising to meet this challenge, developing the consciousness capabilities and ethical maturity that genuine advancement requires. They're becoming bridges between the preserved ancient wisdom and contemporary human needs, translating universal principles into forms that can address current challenges while maintaining the integrity and safety protocols that prevent misuse. These individuals aren't special in any way except for their willingness to undertake the development process that anyone can choose to begin. They've simply made the decision to prioritize consciousness growth over external achievement, wisdom development over information accumulation, service orientation over personal advantage. As more people make this choice, as the network of conscious individuals expands and strengthens, the possibility emerges for a genuine transformation in human civilization. Not just technological advancement or social reform, but fundamental evolution in human consciousness and capability that could establish patterns of sustainable development extending across geological timescales. This transformation won't happen automatically or easily. It requires conscious choice, sustained effort, and the courage to move beyond comfortable limitations into territories of possibility that most people have never imagined. But the potential rewards extend far beyond personal benefit to encompass the future of human civilization itself. The ancient knowledge keepers who built Göbekli Tepe, who established the Tamil Sangams, who created the preservation networks that maintained wisdom through cycles of destruction and renewal, they all face similar choices and challenges. They chose to think beyond immediate circumstances and build for eternity. They chose to develop consciousness as systematically as they developed technology. They chose service over selfishness and wisdom over mere cleverness. Their choice created the legacy we're inheriting today, a vast repository of tested knowledge about consciousness development, sustainable technology, cosmic cycles, and the principles that govern both individual and civilizational evolution. But receiving this inheritance requires proving ourselves worthy of it through the same qualities that created and preserved it across thousands of years. The opportunity exists right now for anyone willing to embrace it. The consciousness techniques are available, the developmental pathways are clear, the guidance systems are active. The ancient knowledge networks are ready to share whatever we're prepared to receive and apply responsibly. But this opportunity comes with a time limit. The cosmic cycles that the ancient builders tracked so carefully indicate we're approaching another major transition point, another testing phase, where human civilization either advances to a new level of capability or experiences another collapse and reset. The choices we make in the coming years will determine which outcome manifests, whether we prove ourselves capable of learning from the wisdom of those who came before us, or whether we repeat the patterns that have limited human potential for far too long. The builders of the megalithic monuments chose consciousness. The keepers of the mystery traditions chose wisdom. The preservers of ancient knowledge chose to think in terms of cosmic time rather than immediate gratification. Now it's our turn to make the same choice, to prove ourselves worthy of the knowledge we seek, to become conscious participants in our own evolution, to carry forward the torch of human understanding into whatever future awaits us. The ancient knowledge is calling. The consciousness techniques are available. The opportunity for genuine advancement beckons. The only question is whether we'll answer that call, embrace those techniques, and seize that opportunity while we still can. Because in the end, the greatest discovery isn't what we might find in ancient ruins or hidden texts or preserved traditions. The greatest discovery is what we might become if we have the courage to develop our full potential as conscious beings. That potential has always existed within us. The ancient knowledge keepers knew it, developed it, and created systems to help others do the same. They built their monuments not just to preserve information, but to remind future generations that human consciousness itself is the greatest treasure, the most powerful technology, and the ultimate key to unlocking mysteries that extend far beyond anything we've yet imagined. The legacy of Lemuria isn't just about lost continents or ancient civilizations. It's about recognizing that we are the inheritors of a wisdom tradition that spans thousands of years and offers pathways to capabilities we're only beginning to understand. The question that remains is whether we'll prove ourselves worthy of that inheritance, whether we'll develop the consciousness necessary to receive it, and whether we'll have the wisdom to use it in service of a future that honors both the achievements of the past and the unlimited potential that lies ahead. The choice is ours, the time is now, and the ancient knowledge keepers are waiting to see what we decide.